Okay, it looks like we're almost up to 100 people, which is really exciting. So just want to say hello. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us this evening to have a few minutes to talk about the role that public space has played during the current crisis and what this means moving forward. Hope everyone has a drink ready, has a moment to relax after a long day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Brown-Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of Greenbelt Alliance. And if you're not familiar with our work, welcome. We're really excited to see you, and we're happy that so many of you could join. This is the beginning, the kickoff of our summer webinar series. We're very excited to kick off with this topic. Since for over 60 years, Greenbelt Alliance has been working to save the iconic open spaces in the Bay Area and help foster vibrant, inclusive, affordable cities and towns. We believe that there's an incredible value in living in a place that you love, which is why we love partnering with firms like Gehl that are dedicated to creating cities for people. I want to take a moment to introduce our guest here, Ghigo DiTommaso. Ghigo is a director at Gehl, where he leads master plans, public life studies, and urban prototyping projects in North, Central, and throughout South America. He's worked for Gehl since they opened an office in San Francisco. He's also teaches at UC Berkeley's College of Environmental Design. Welcome, Ghigo. I'm very excited to talk tonight. I'm going to start out by asking a few questions, and then we're going to have some time for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box, and then we'll pull the questions out toward the end. So please go ahead and type those throughout the session. All right, we just have a short time here, so let's get started. In the 2 months now we've had since the shelter-in-place orders went into place here in the Bay Area, the need for access to public open space has never been more clear. I know my walks around the neighborhood are essential for my own mental health as well as exercise. I am fortunate to live in a neighborhood that has beautiful gardens as well as generous neighbors if we ever want to steal a lemon or two, which is great. And so, you know, we've had this real spike in usage and appreciation of our public open spaces. But at the same time, we've really seen a disparity between communities that have great access to open space and communities that don't. For some, it's really relatively easy to take advantage of going to a big park, going to hiking trails. For other people and other communities, relatively crowded sidewalks or currently abandoned parking lots are really the only accessible areas for fresh air and exercise. Recently, I saw in areas where parks are still closed, families kind of huddled on median strips in the middle of the street to actually have some time to recreate outdoors. So I know that Gehl has spent years studying how people use open space, public space, and recently conducted a survey to better understand how our interactions with public space have changed all around the globe due to the current pandemic. I'd love to hear a little bit about what your findings have been, the results, and some of the trends you're seeing right now.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me for this webinar. Yes, Gehl has been working on capturing some of the perception of people that lives in city with regard to their public space in this time of COVID. We've done it in a few ways. We've conducted a survey that is actually global, as global is the pandemic, asking people how they're using public spaces in the specific context of the cities where they live, in the countries where they live. And then we coupled that with on-the-ground public life study. This is a kind of analysis that we do through mostly observational analysis at the street level And we've done that in both New York and Copenhagen, and in different times of the emergency, when it was just started and then a little later when it was reaching the peak, if you will. And we are now in the process of crunching the data and generating insights. What I can say already that is emerging very, very clearly is that people really feel in cities across the world the pinch when it comes to the allocation of space. They actually feel that sidewalks are too narrow for them to walk freely, given the health restrictions that we all have. That there's no place to bike or to walk safely, or at least not enough space. So there's certainly a realization, a sudden realization of how narrow are our sidewalks, how underinvested is our bicycle infrastructure, and how much more we can do to really make our public spaces more accessible and more usable. The other interesting insight for me has been to find out that when we ask the question, what are the activities that you do outside in spite of the necessity to shelter in place, almost as high, and in some cases higher than, well, I go outside to, to take care of very important errands, right? To do grocery and other things that I cannot do otherwise. Equally as high in terms of what is ranked is actually walking or biking as a way to foster people's sense of physical and psychological health. So people are really taking the street because they need to, they need that walk, they need that bike ride to feel balanced, to feel good. And again, this is a reaffirmation of the importance of public space as a space that is able to provide that sense of connection with nature, respite in cities, just as in the great outdoors. The other thing that really strikes me in terms of results that was not necessarily something we anticipated is that people are actually driving their car much less, right? And maybe this is because they are staying within the neighborhood, because their trips are shortened. Of course, now many people are not driving to their work unless they must because of what they do. But in general terms, what the data seems to show is that people are just switching their habits. They're walking to make that walk that maybe they would not do to reach a destination they would drive to previously. So there is really a pattern shift in terms of how people get around. And I think 66 of the respondents says they are actually driving much less than what they used to before the emergency started.
Yeah, I believe that. That's I think one of the nice benefits of not having to commute is not being stuck in traffic. And kind of to go back to your comments around how people are, the desire, this need people have to get outside. I've been thinking a lot about the dilemma that local governments are facing. Initially, we saw decisions made to close a lot of parks due to try to discourage people from congregating in groups. And I think in a lot of ways that was probably swung too far to one side. Now many parks are opening again, but cities and counties and park districts are trying to fight of protecting and public health, and also the real need for people to get outside, to get fresh air, and to see other people. What examples really stand out to you where you've seen communities creatively transform public spaces while still keeping health front and center?
Yes, yes, it is very true that in the early weeks of the crisis, the first reaction of the governments, by the governments, that stood out was actually the closure of many public spaces.
Mhm.
I'm Italian. I remember the day I read the news that all public parks had to close all across the country, right? It's just probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, and certainly, you know, unprecedented and dramatic decision. But now I would say in the last few weeks, what we have seen and what really stands out is something radically different. Um, what is everywhere in the press is a series of initiatives by mayors, by cities all across the world that are expanding the allocation of public space to people for walking and biking. There is a series of interventions, some of which are about expanding the sidewalks into the street. There are a series of initiatives about actually allowing small businesses to expand themselves into the streets. And we see that locally. We see what is doing, what Oakland is doing, what San Francisco is doing, what Berkeley is proposed to do. And we see also that globally, right? We see what cities like Bogota has been doing by making their temporary bike, bike infrastructure permanent by closing the street every day of the week to car traffic so that more bikes could flow through it. Milan is taking some very bold moves. We all read about Vilnius, Lithuania, opening up the space of the city for cafes to expand in the street. So it's really a remarkable step forward toward making cities more open and more accessible. I think that is very important that the Bay Area looks at this other examples as is defining its own policies. I'm a big fan of keeping a global look when it comes to this kind of things. I think that too often we compare ourselves only with other US cities. And if we do that, sometimes we run the risk to be a little self-referenced. So I really like that San Francisco is, ganging with these other cities across the world doing very bold moves in this regard. I think that the message that is emerging is very positive and is very hopeful in terms of what is ahead of us.
Yeah, I've definitely appreciated the effort my city of Oakland has done already to open streets to pedestrians, and I know I'm going in and recommending to the city many other streets that I think that they should be closing off to cars as well. But are there examples in particular, to kind of get back to the issue of equity, where you've seen cities in particular increasing access to public spaces in areas where there haven't been as good access to parks or urban green space?
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly an eye on issues of distribution of public space and access inequality. My impression is that the cities that already had on their agenda improving access in underserved communities, bridging the gap in terms of public space access, now they know well what to do, and they are taking steps in the right directions. If that agenda was lacking in the first place, it's more difficult to see progress in that direction. So, for example, I can see that when it comes to the Bay Area, there is certainly an effort to select streets for this kind of intervention in a way that is cognizant of the lack of equity in distribution of high quality public spaces. So in a way, cities that already had a strong policy are doing better. The other thing I would say, which is interesting to notice here in terms of understanding that this transformation, these changes are relying on a prior work to improve access and improve quality of public space. It's interesting to say that you see that many cities are using tools that were already existing, right? So there's nothing radically new in what all of these cities are doing. I'm thinking of Milan that is closing the Corso, creating a temporary bike lane, making the space for pedestrians much bigger, is doing it with the same tools that the Jeanette Sadiq Khan used in New York 10 years ago to do the remake of Broadway. So it's not really that we need tools that we didn't have before. The tools were there, but now we are in the position, now we have the determination, now there is the urgency to put those tools to use. And again, cities that know that it is important to bridge the gap of when it comes to access to public space in different neighborhoods now are in the position to make those step forwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the situation has really magnified, I think, the need for a shift or continued shift in the design and planning of our cities and public spaces to ground the experience of people more. It's interesting because I have heard some discussion around cities and are people going to want to leave urban areas. And for me, being close to other people, close to amenities, able to walk, and even when we're sheltering at home, just being able to see and experience other people around me is so important. And I feel like in a lot of ways, people are going to look to cities to adapt and continue to thrive. As you said, people are walking and biking more for recreation and also for transportation, and looking at the hyperlocal. How can we reorient our day-to-day lives to accommodate our needs and desires to get outside near home, as well as get to services, think of different ways we go to jobs. And we've seen throughout history that big disruptive events like this can really influence architecture and development for years to come. I've seen some interesting things about how the 1918 flu influenced architecture. So from this moment, how do you think the design of public spaces may change because of what we've observed during this pandemic?
Yes, so it is obvious that public space design will change, and it will have to change and will change. Now, I think that in terms of knowing how, I want to be cautious. I think it's very early. I see that in the press, there is a lot of people that share their opinion on what is going to happen. I'm afraid that some of those people may be speaking just a little too early. So one thing, in my opinion, it is important to remember is that things are still very much in flux, and that there is still a lot to be understood. And we have to actually learn to embrace a little more the indeterminacy of the moment. That's actually, for me is the first important point. So first of all, when it comes to public space design, we have to learn to accept that we don't know what is to come. And therefore, we have to build flexibility, adaptability into the frameworks, into the projects that we are implementing. So one thing I know, public space design will have to move toward more flexible frameworks. There are a lot of things that unfortunately we don't know yet, and I would encourage us all to, even if it's against our tendency as a society, we're looking for ready answers. And of course, in a case of a crisis like this, we want a ready reaction, but we also have to understand that this is a situation that is still unfolding. And in order to get to the right level of discernment, we have to wait just a little. I do want to try to say, nevertheless, a few things that we can see from now are bound to change. I've been very interested by the different reactions of different countries to the shelter in place. Amanda, you were mentioning just a moment ago that, actually this crisis has showed us that we need the social interaction even more than what we thought we did. And it's been quite beautiful for me to see how you have seen people of from all over the world, of cities across the world, really living, inhabiting the boundary between their private sphere and the public space, right? Not being able to get out on the streets, they were inhabiting their balconies, their terraces, their roofs, trying to connect with one another, trying to connect with, with the friends, with the acquaintances, with the familiar strangers, and with the strangers, right? Now, as you compare different examples of different cities, you see that actually different kind of architecture allow or don't allow to inhabit so well that limit between the private sphere and the public sphere. And that limit is so rich and so beautiful and so important. So this is, my personal reflection. If you look at the same kind of photos that are taken of people trying to interact with the outside in the US, a lot of people are pressed against their windows because they don't have a balcony, right? Or they don't have a shared backyard with their neighbors to whatever, sing a song or cheer with a glass. And so I think that one thing that will change in terms of the way in which public space design, architecture design will evolve, we would be a little bit more aware of that point of connection between our domestic sphere, what happens in our households, and what's happening in the city. And design can be very deliberate and rich about fostering that relationship. So that's something maybe quite specific, but I'm very interested in seeing what is going to happen. Maybe we're going to have more perimeter block housing complexes here in the U.S. as they wanted to be in a tradition in other countries of the world. Who knows?
Okay, I'm actually going to jump to a couple of our questions now from the audience, and I'm going to read out a couple at a time. I know we are nearing the end of our time here, but there's some great questions coming out from all over the country. We have a question, I'm going to read out two right now. A question from Tom Dougherty in Western Pennsylvania. Here we're seeing an enormous spike in the use of conservation areas and open spaces. Can you provide some hard data on the increase of use to help us build our ongoing case for increased support? And then another question from kind of on the other side of this from Anu Natarajan here in the Bay Area. Hi, Anu. Are you sensing that the street closures and taking over for walking, biking, cafes are temporary, and when we go back to business as usual, those will revert back? And I guess a question of how can we make them more permanent is something I would add. So kind of on both sides, if you want some brief comments on those, and then we'll try some concise answers so we can squeeze in one more question.
Yes, I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can. To the first question, we have some hard data at the moment just for when it comes to patterns of use, just for Copenhagen and New York, but still, there is some interesting data there in terms of access to nature. And we have a lot of global data, but that is more about perception, right? So what people say that they need, what feel that they want. Happy to follow up and share our reports and more work will come because we're just started really on a new, quite expansive research on all of these topics. When it comes to the temporary transformation of streets, will they become permanent or not? I think that, you know, what is important is that even if they were to be temporary, they're having an impact on people's mindset. So they're really helping creating a change in mindset in people. Like I see a lot of people that I would not expect enjoying the closure of a major street next to my house, really loving it, really, you know, embracing it, having their kids on bikes playing, you know, in the middle of the street, which is something they've never done. So I think that the experience of this street closure is quite transformative for everybody. That said, some of these streets will possibly, unfortunately, go back to normal, but not necessarily. I think that some of these pilots may be here to stay, and I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so we're reaching the end of our quick half-hour chat. I think this is it's a fun format to kind of get back and forth, but there's lots of great questions. So I wanted to highlight a few ways you can learn more about our work and Gehl's work and get some of these questions answered in the future. So in the chat box, we've posted links to the surveys and where you can learn other aspects of Gehl's work. I'd also ask you to please go to greenbelt.org if you're not already following us, and sign up for a newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We're trying to start a new Instagram presence, so you can do that as well. We also have our next upcoming webinar on May 28th about the role that greenbelts play in building wildfire resilience in the face of climate change. You can go to our website, go to events to sign up there. And to learn more, we'll grab some of these questions, we'll summarize what we talked about and do some follow-up and put it also in an interview format on the blog on our website. So please go to that. If there's more questions, definitely reach out to Ghigo or to me. Thank you so much, Ghigo, for your time. Thanks so much. We have over 100 people with us right now, which is fantastic. So great for you to take a few minutes out of your evening. Hopefully you can enjoy the beautiful evening, walk around your neighborhood, think about what we can hold on from what we are learning around how we can really think about how we interact with space differently, how we prioritize space for people, health of people, and how we build great cities for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.